Right, I'm happy that most of us are excited for doubt. I also really like this argument from Descartes. And so I'm tackling jointly two of the objectives. And the first is to summarize the argument that concludes with, I think, therefore I am. And the second is to explain why many consider Descartes to be the father of modern philosophy. I've decided to use this sort of grid image instead of the classical picture of Descartes, because this is actually called the Cartesian plane after Descartes, and he invented this mathematics. So it also shows that he's not just abstract philosopher, but he was in other fields also, and an immensely intelligent human being and productive. I think that's probably more important. So generally born just towards the end of the 1500s, died middle 1600s, born in France. I think he died in Sweden. He was tutoring Queen Christina, if I'm not mistaken. He died of cold. He was a philosopher, scientist, and mathematician. And then, as I just mentioned, he combined geometry with algebra into analytic geometry, which is a massive breakthrough if you're into mathematics in any way. And there is the man. So we have, I think, therefore I am. The Latin, cogito ergo sum, which is a direct translation. And before we get to the argument itself, let's just ask ourselves, what does he want to do with this argument? Why does this argument exist? And, well, I think he wants what probably everyone wants at some point in their life, certainty, absolute truth. And how does he go about finding absolute truth? He has a methodology, and it's radical doubt. So let's look at the argument. That's fairly simple. I think it's like Ben said, it's convincing, certainly, and it's elegant. So the argument is very simple, and he says, if it is possible to doubt something, then it cannot be certainly true. You could doubt it and doubt that it's true and be wrong that it is true, but you don't know this. You wouldn't know whether you're wrong or right. I can say at the moment that the tallest person in France has a name that starts with an F. I could be true, I could be false, I don't know. And if I don't know, then it's not certain truth. And so let's consider it for the moment to not be true. And in this way, we'll find something, hopefully, that we cannot consider to be false. And so he asks the very simple question, can I doubt my senses? And the answer is yes. You could be in a dream, for example. I guess we've all seen The Matrix. Sometimes we hallucinate. Sometimes optical illusions make us think that we see something which we don't, mirages in the desert, so we can't trust our senses all the time. And because it's possible to doubt them, we should doubt them, and they are not a candidate for absolute truth. What about my past? Did I get out of bed this morning? We can doubt that. My memory could be faulty. We know that humans' memories are incredibly faulty. And then the slightly more abstract, can I doubt that 2 + 3 = 5? This seems a slightly more difficult thing to doubt. And he invents the evil demon. So every time I have 2 pens and 3 pens, and I count them up to 5, and I tell myself 2 + 3 is 5, there could be an evil demon messing with my thoughts and making me assume the wrong answer. And so therefore we have to doubt even mathematical insights or mathematical truths. And so the question becomes, what is left, right? What is indubitable? What can I not doubt? My senses, my memory, mathematics, all of these I can doubt. And here we get to the genius, really. I cannot doubt the fact that I am doubting. It's pretty straightforward. It's kind of obviously true. If you are doubting, you are doubting. And it's a recursive logic. What I mean by that is if you say, okay, let's not doubt that I am doubting, you get into a weird logical space because I'm obviously doubting something. And so I can't say I'm not doubting when I'm actually doubting. And so doubting occurs. And if doubting occurs, then thinking occurs. And if thinking occurs, then something is doing the thinking. And so when I doubt when I doubt, I am thinking, and therefore, when I think, I must exist. So you can't doubt the fact that you're doubting. Stated differently, you can't doubt the fact that you're thinking. And so we know that thinking exists, and we know that something must be doing the thinking, and therefore, I think, therefore I am. So this is the brief outline of this argument. Before I go further, I want to ask if anyone has any criticism or thoughts or implications that come to mind with this argument, or does anyone find it utterly convincing and this argument simply is fundamental truth? Juan, I see you nodding, and Abigail, also a hand.
Sorry, I don't know like how to put the hand up, lower hand. Okay, I'm still learning the same stuff. I don't have like a very good way of like describing this because I haven't studied it too much. But I would say my general vibe right now is like, oh, I don't fully agree because I don't fully understand, I guess. And so part of it is I question, well, how everyone thinks differently, and are we talking about what about for somebody whose thought process or their consciousness isn't unified, it's complex, and so their thinking isn't stable, and so there's something there, and maybe he took that into account in the way he very methodically questions this and doubts this. I just haven't studied into that, so I don't understand that entirely, but I question it because I think it was revolutionary from what I see him doing and the little I understand, that he did create this dualism of mind and body. And so it was really important to do that. But then I also wonder, but to what extent is it important to bring that back too? And there's like an interplay there and to what importance it was for him in his philosophy to doubt his senses and to let that go, and then to what importance is it to acknowledge his senses and the information that his senses prove to him, I guess.
Thank you very much for that. I will address all of those. Those are some very good points, particularly about the self. This is a deep question about Descartes. Does anybody else have anything that they would like to comment before I proceed? All good? Okay. So I think the most general question is, okay, I think, therefore I am, but are you? I don't know that you think. You tell me you think, but so does my computer, which doesn't think. Or I can record my voice onto a tape deck saying, I really think, I promise I think. And it doesn't mean that the tape deck is thinking because it's saying it's thinking. I have no access to your mind in a direct sense, absolutely zero. You could be a robot. So I don't know that anyone else exists. If I think, therefore I am, is what I'm using my basis of. And then this is the question that Abigail was asking: how do I exist? So for Descartes, I think, therefore I exist. So how do I exist? Well, as a thinking being, the thing that thinks. That's it. So I exist with reason. I exist as a mind. But the question, of course, is yes. What about the body? Where is this mind if it's just a mind? And so we have this dualism where he's unable to show thus far that the body or anything physical exists, and yet we very much feel that we have this embodied self. And so to get to the question of the complex self or the unified self that Abigail raised, very, very good question. This is a standard critique of Descartes. We call it the Cartesian subject that he created. And it's a subject whose thinking is clear to themselves. It's based on being reasonable and rational, based on being logical. And this is where the self is anchored. Many people are not this. Many cultures are not this. Many languages don't work in this way, like English does with the subject and then the verb, I am thinking, where you can separate the I from the thinking. This could be a quirk of some languages, and in other languages, this doesn't appear. The conception of the self could be incredibly different in many other cultures, and Descartes cannot account for this. So in this case, he's a product of his geography and of his world. So 1600s European man, and he inherits a lot of his context when he's coming up with his argument, which is to be expected. Then we can ask, should we take Descartes seriously? He says he doubts everything that he can doubt, and he arrives at this one foundational truth. In his conclusion, he uses the word therefore. And so there's causality in there, and he's never doubted causality. And we can even say he doubts mathematics, 2 + 2 = 4, of course, my apologies. But causality, he never subjects to, excuse me, to doubt. He later accounts for this, and he says, if you can't trust this, then really you can't do anything in the world, right? Then you have nothing at your disposal to say or do anything, so it's meaningless to go in this direction. But is that a methodologically sound point that he makes? That's up for debate. An implication of this is that he champions rationalism, which I like to think of as armchair philosophy, right? He sits, he thinks, and through that he gets truth. He doesn't go into the world, he doesn't experience, he doesn't do science by manipulating anything. He sits down, he uses his reason, and with this he gets results. And a big result. He uses, I think, therefore I am, as a foundational truth, and then from that he can build up very many other truths, and ultimately, yes, he can account for how we can believe our senses, how we can trust our senses, why we have a body, etc., etc. But he anchors all of this in thought. And solipsism, sorry, is the term for I am the only one that exists. There's an interesting consequence of a solipsism. I don't know how much this was in his mind. If only I exist to me, then I've created everything around me. Only my mind exists in this whole universe because I don't know that you have a mind, so I don't know that you exist. Only I exist, which means I've created everything, which makes me the creator, which is a very rough position to place yourself into. Politically, it's a little dodgy, especially for his time. And so he very quickly argued back into the existence of a god, and argued that he himself is, of course, not that god. But this is one of the logical implications. If you are the only thing in existence, then everything is coming from your mind, which would make you the creator, which is not the argument that he wants to make. Right, so as to the next one, the next objective, which is slightly shorter because it just depends on a very large, to a very large extent on the previous. How is it that many people say that Descartes is the father of modern philosophy? Well, if he's the father of modern philosophy, if modern philosophy is his child, if he kind of, you know, if this followed from him, then the question is, what was before? And in general, we can just think of this as scholasticism. And this is where the medieval theological philosophy, religious philosophy, inherited an immense amount of Aristotle. And this was pretty much how we can think of European philosophy at that time. Christianity derived from Aristotle or appropriated via Aristotle. And he thought this was very abstract, a bit too complex, not very useful to him. And then there's a more philosophical difference, and that is that Aristotle, as interpreted in the Middle Ages, was tending towards sensationalism, which is the idea that we're born with an empty mind and we accumulate knowledge through our senses, through our life. And this clashes with the armchair image of Descartes, who doesn't go into the world and engage with the world for knowledge. He simply sits and thinks. And Aristotle and the scholastic view is opposed to this. And so what was happening in Descartes' world? How did he come up with the work that he did? Well, his world was becoming more and more a mechanistic universe where it was explained in the sort of physical sciences. So I just remind you of his birth dates there, end of 1600 to 1650. We had Galileo Galilei around the same time. He's considered the father of modern science, or at least of the methodology of modern science. He championed the Copernican heliocentrism, where it's the sun in the center of the solar system and not the Earth. So he begins to explain how the heavens work according to principles. We had Kepler, 1906. He established the first two laws of planetary motion. And again, here we see our universe as being a physical thing with objects that are moving around in a predictable, rational way, not because of any divine general thoughts, not because of some thought Aristotle had about essences, but about the basic introduction of things like gravity. And if the world is this mechanistic place that we can explain by basic principles, then there's really no space in this for a philosophy like Aristotle or scholasticism. And so Descartes wanted to bring in something fresh, something new, something that uses just everyday logic, a pretty simple argument, as I think explained in a single slide. And then, of course, he ushers in this new era.